Good day. Now that you've learned how to use the database inside Laravel, you can now work with forms. So the first thing that we need to do is to create a new view which would output our form. So if you remember, views are created in the resources and then the views directory. So we right click on the views directory and then select new file. Now we say the name of the view is new user. So if you remember, views should always have the .blade.php extension. So we open this, and then this view should extend the default layout. So this one, so layouts and then the default file. So extends layout.default. Then we define the content section. So here we have our form. Next, we need to specify the method. So the form will be submitted using the post. So we need to add the label as well, the name, and then the ID should be the same as the for attribute. So every time you click on the label, this field should be selected. So now we're going to the controller and create a new method for serving this view. So public function and then new user. Then it will just return the new user view. So now we need to add this method to our routes. So routes can be found under the app http and then routes file. So we use the get method, route get, and then user new home controller at new user. So every time this route is accessed, it should show the form. So we go here and then user new. So it's saying that layout.default is not found. So we had a mistake under the new user. So it's only saying layout instead of layouts. So here we have layouts, so it should be layouts as well. So refresh. Okay. So now we need to write the method for processing the form when this submit button is clicked. So go back to the controller and then create a new method, public function save new user. So now how do we get the data that we have passed in here? So in plain PHP you would do something like this, $_post and then the name of the text field. But since we're not in plain PHP, we have to do it using Laravel's way. So first let's actually try if that still works. So let's return the post name. Let's see if Laravel allows us to do that. So submit. Okay, so we got the token mismatch exception. So this is because Laravel prevents us from submitting forms without having a hidden field that generates the CSRF token. So this allows us to prevent cross-site request forgery. So just Google that. But it's just a way to make our forms more secure so that hackers cannot do something bad. So now let's add the CSRF token. Oops. So when you got an error like this, you can simply just Google it. Okay, so usually the first 3 results will have the answer that you want. Okay, so this is the one. So we need to add this hidden field into our forms so that a CSRF token will be generated. So go to the new user view and then add it as a hidden field. So the type will be hidden, and then the name should always be underscore token, and the value should be the value returned by the CSRF token method. So you can see from here that it's not actually just variables that you have access to. You can actually call functions that you have defined. So CSRF token method is a built-in method in Laravel, so you can directly call it inside this view. So now let's try to submit. Go back, then refresh, submit. Okay, so now we have a new error, method not allowed, HTTP exception. So once you get this method, it means that the route for this specific path is not defined yet. But you might say that we have already defined it because it's already in here. But no, that's a mistake because it's just responding to the GET request. So if you remember, we are submitting the form using the POST method, so we should define a separate route for responding to the POST request to this same path. So to do that, you need to go to the routes.php file and then define a new route. So route, and then instead of get, you use post, and then use the same. And now you will have the different method. So save new user. So now we need to define this method. So go back to the home controller, so it's already here, and then we're expecting to get the name that we have added. So just refresh this one. Okay, so we actually have access to the data using the plain PHP way, but This way is not recommended, so we should do things using Laravel's way. So to do that, go to the documentation and then find the request. So under the basics, click on the request link. So this is the one that we need. So the request class under the illuminate HTTP namespace. So we copy this and then we paste it at the top. Now we can just use the request class to access the different inputs. So the request class can be injected as the argument on this method. So we say request and then the variable where it will be added. So request. So now we can use the request variable instead of the request class. So you can actually make this shorter if you want. So rec. And now we can get the input using the input method, and then this method will accept the name field. So name. So if we check the form, we have the value of the name as name, so we have added it as name. So if we refresh, we should still get the same output. Okay, so that's how you get form data from Laravel. Now all we need to do is to assign this to a variable name and then call the database. So db table testing and then insert. Then inside is the array containing the data for the user. So name and then the name variable. So once it's done, we need to redirect back to the form. So return redirect. So this redirect method accepts the route where we want to redirect. So user and then new. Then we can pass in the message as well. So if you want to output something like a success message, you can use the with method, and then this accepts two arguments. The first is the variable where it's going to be assigned, and then the second is the value that this variable is going to have. So you can have any data type that you want, but the commonly used one is arrays or just strings. So we say user has been added. So that's it. Now we need to access this from our view. So go to the view and then define something like a div for the alert. So first we need to check if the message is present in the session. Then we just output it if it's present. Okay, so let's try. enter, then so it's saying that user has been added, but now we have to check in the database if it has been added. So it's there. So just a recap, when passing in data, you need to use the with method, and this accepts the first argument as the variable that you want to assign, and then the value. So this message variable will now be assigned to the session, so we access it using the session method, and then check if the message is present. If it is, then just output it. So you can also use arrays as well, so let's try array, and then for example you have a CSS class for defining a different look for the alert box, so you can pass that, and then it will use the value for the box to have a different styling. For example, if the user hasn't been added, you can have a class of error in here, and then in your CSS you can have that error, and then you can define a different background color. So I'll show that to you in a future video, but for now let's just stick with this. So instead of error, success. Now we can access the type and then the text under the message session. So we check still if the message session is present, but now we can access the text variable. Now you can add the class in here as well. So session message dot type, something like that. So go here, then submit. So user has been added. Okay, it's added. But now if you check the source, you can now see that we have a success class, which you can use to manipulate with CSS. So alert.success should have a background color of green. So that's it for this video.